Kane had long cultivated a sophisticated image in the eyes of those around him, a man with a strategic mind, always hiding his true intentions behind a calm smile and sweet words. As his ambitions grew, he understood that he could not win corporate battles alone, especially when facing powerful forces like Newman or Jabot. That was why Amanda was brought into the group as a strategic pawn, a shrewd, reputable legal advisor with an ethical facade that Kane thought he could use to hide his hidden agenda. However, his time in Nice proved something that even Kane did not want to admit: Amanda was not someone to be manipulated. The simmering disagreements between the two began to become clear as Kane's plans increasingly veered into the gray areas of law and ethics, while Amanda remained steadfast in her principles and red lines. Kane, who was not willing to take risks from within, began to think of an alternative. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. All the content I make is just speculation and personal sharing. If you find the video interesting and useful, please support me with a like and leave a comment. If you have better ideas or more interesting speculations, please share them in the comments section for everyone to discuss. I appreciate all your contributions and support. Sincerely, thank you. Michael, a name once associated with power and legal battles with Victor, was now adrift after leaving the Newman family's sphere of influence. With his extensive experience, his fortitude that had been tempered over the years, and most importantly, no longer bound by rigid ethics like Amanda, Michael became an ideal chess piece that Kane longed to bring to the team. What made Kane feel most advantageous was that Michael was no longer loyal to Victor, no longer bound by family loyalty, and seemed ready to enter a new battle with the mindset of a free man, as long as there was a strong enough reason and an attractive enough reward. Michael's departure from Victor could have stemmed from long-term dissatisfaction, exhaustion after endless battles, or simply because he needed a new path, a chance to prove himself after a past of being overshadowed in the shadow of tycoons like Victor and Jack. Kane saw the opportunity, but he also knew it was not an easy gamble. Bringing Michael back would mean sacrificing Amanda or making her leave gracefully. What Kane did not expect, however, was that Amanda had long noticed the change in his demeanor. Meetings were postponed, important decisions were made without her input, documents were passed around for review. All of it was like tiny needles that crept into Amanda's consciousness. She was not one to be fooled, especially when she had been hurt by betrayals in the past. With her keen intelligence and analytical skills, Amanda began to quietly collect information, cross-reference behavior, and eventually realized that Michael's presence in the internal documents was no coincidence. The truth gradually became clear: Kane was planning to replace her with the man she once considered her most formidable rival in the legal profession. Betrayal did not make Amanda angry impulsively. She was the type of person who dealt with grief strategically. She quietly withdrew from meetings, declined favorable proposals, and quietly created the distance she needed to prepare for a bigger move. Amanda did not need direct confrontation to express her anger. She knew her worth in this volatile world, and she also understood that Kane was now playing a risky game by thinking he could control Michael better than she could. What Kane did not consider was the possibility that Amanda might not simply leave, but instead establish her own new power. A neutral faction that belonged to no one but had the power to influence everyone. If Amanda chose to fight back, she would likely approach Victor, who had always valued loyalty and discipline. But Victor was also a man who never forgot what had happened in the past, especially if Amanda had challenged the values he stood for. However, if Victor sees the true value that Amanda brings, especially in holding inside information from Kane, he may put aside his hatred to put her in a new orbit of power. Conversely, Amanda could also choose Jack, who, although not as sharp and vicious as Victor, knows how to use trust to win people's hearts. For Jack, Amanda can act as the last line of defense against Kane's underground waves, especially when Jack needs a new ally to protect Jabot from the hidden financial punches that Kane plans to throw. The scariest choice, however, is not to join any faction, but to stand alone, to create a separate sphere of influence. An independent legal entity, a small network of lawyers and business experts who have been eliminated or betrayed by large corporations, may be the most revolutionary step Amanda has ever taken. With a history of loss, she no longer believes in central powers like Victor or Jack, and even less wants to depend on anyone else to survive. It is Kane's silent removal that becomes the catalyst for Amanda's transformation, from an advisor who depends on the power of others, to an independent female strategist, ready to influence and break up seemingly impregnable alliances. Meanwhile, Kane faces a new paradox. Even with Michael, he is not completely at ease. Michael may be sharp, may be willing to work in the dark, but he is also not completely loyal. Michael himself had turned against those who had protected him, and that was what made it impossible for Kane to fully control him. Once Michael felt he had been used or saw a better opportunity from a rival, he would not hesitate to withdraw, or worse, transfer all sensitive information to Kane's enemies. This situation put Kane in a difficult position, unable to keep Amanda, but also unable to fully trust Michael. The price of the change was not only the loss of a former ally but also the growing instability within his own strategic group. If Amanda did emerge as a new neutral force, she could be the one holding sensitive evidence of the illegal activities that Kane had hidden, from the use of seized assets to the shady meetings that took place in Nice involving some of the world's financial elite. A well-timed leak could cause Kane's entire strategy to collapse, leading to legal and media intervention. And if that happened, Michael would quickly retreat to protect himself, leaving Kane isolated and without anyone truly on his side. What seemed like a simple switch, replacing Amanda with Michael, now became the trigger for a domino effect that even Kane could not control. Amanda, with the fortitude of someone who had overcome heartache, might not just leave quietly but disappear for a while, only to return like a storm. And when that storm came, Kane would have nowhere to hide, no one to blame, except himself. Because sometimes, it is the contempt for what seems to be the weakest that leads to the greatest collapse. And in the moment when Kane thought he had everything under control, he lost the most important piece on the chessboard of power he had created. In the swirl of intrigue that is gradually tightening the grip on Genoa's business world, new moves continue to be put on the table, and Michael is now not only a legal tool, but also a dangerous link carrying an unfinished past with Victor. Having been Victor's confidant, Michael understands every fragile line between principles and intrigues that Victor has built throughout his career. But it is also that long-standing relationship that makes Michael feel offended when Victor no longer places him in a strategic position. After a series of times being left out of important plans, especially when Victor chooses younger, more controllable faces to entrust major projects, Michael begins to feel betrayed. Kane sees that rift and is quick to exploit it. He approaches Michael not only with financial benefits or vague promises, but with a tactic that attacks the deepest vulnerability, the feeling of being ignored. Kane knew that a man like Michael, who had once stood beside the greatest power in Genoa and now had to retreat behind the scenes, would not easily endure prolonged obscurity. And above all, Kane knew that Michael was someone who could do anything if he believed that he was carrying out a bigger, grander plan, to regain the value that others had deliberately discarded. That was why Kane did not rush to make a direct offer, but instead, threw out pieces of information, unfinished plans, so that Michael could see the potential and proactively step forward. But what Kane could not be sure of was the true nature of Michael's heart. Was the cold reaction to Victor really the beginning of a breakup, or just a stage in a much more sophisticated plan? Because Michael, with all the years of working on the most complicated cases, also knew how to play a double game without being detected. If he still had loyalty to Victor, then joining Kane's side was not a betrayal but a form of strategic infiltration, a way to sabotage from within. And if that were the case, Victor would be the one who would be controlling the entire scenario, turning Kane into a puppet who didn't know he was being manipulated. It's also possible that Victor had foreseen everything. After decades of manipulating opposing forces, Victor could have used Michael himself as a final tool to control his enemies. He knew full well that Kane was impatient, wanting to break free, and was also making the mistake of believing that those who had served Victor could be bought off. Michael, under the guise of a wounded and rebelling man, could have been secretly gathering information, recording covert activities, and waiting for the right moment to strike the decisive blow on Victor's behalf. That explains why he always keeps a certain distance from Kane's major decisions, sometimes remaining suspiciously silent when faced with risky proposals from new allies. If Michael is indeed an insider, it would not only be a masterstroke by Victor but also a testament to the fact that true power lies beyond the surface. Kane may be happy to recruit a powerful chess piece, but at the same time he is unaware that his own chessboard is being controlled by another player standing far away. Amanda, despite leaving, has been quietly observing these developments. She knows Michael's nature well, and if she sees suspicious signs, it is not impossible that she will return not to cooperate, but to prevent a mass collapse that could take innocent people with it. However, there is a more dangerous assumption: if Michael has no loyalty to anyone. If Victor's coldness had made Michael truly want to create his own empire, then joining hands with Cain was just the beginning of a double manipulation. By holding information from both sides, Michael could wait for the ideal moment to betray both, unleashing the secrets he had gathered from both Victor and Cain to gain a completely new foothold in the Genoa hierarchy. It would be a silent coup, but as devastating as any scandal that had come before. Whatever happened, Michael's appearance on Cain's team marked a major turning point. His presence was not only a sign that Cain was climbing the ladder of power, but also a potential threat that could sink everything if mishandled. Cain, who was confident in his ability to read human psychology, may have misjudged someone too dangerous to be taken lightly this time. Michael, with his calm face and gentle words, can be the wind that carries Cain's boat far, or the sudden tornado that tears everything apart in just one night. And somewhere in the shadows, Victor remained silent. He made no move, no declaration, no threat, but he did not retreat either. Those who knew Victor knew that his silence was always a sign of a plan in progress. If Victor had indeed deliberately let Michael into enemy territory, then he was preparing for a final counterattack, where every move was precisely made, where every betrayal was a disguise for a victory long planned. And if Victor still held true power, then the day the truth was revealed would not only be the end of Cain, but the final lesson for anyone who dared to believe that the man who had built an empire could be manipulated. Victor had always been a man who knew how to use any alliance, even temporary and dangerous ones, to protect the empire he had worked so hard to build. As the surrounding forces increasingly encroached on Newman Enterprises' sphere of influence, Victor understood that he needed a new card to temporarily quench Cain's thirst for power, a rising man with ambitions to expand into every financial structure that existed in Genoa. The idea of using Nick as a middleman to build a loose alliance between Newman and Cain was a calculated one. He did not expect a lasting relationship or a long-term trust. What he needed was an excuse to make Cain feel like he was being given a chance to cooperate, thereby turning his attention to Jabot and away from Chancellor, where Victor still maintained tight financial control. With Nick tasked with making friends, Victor believed that by sowing the seeds of trust, he could turn an enemy into a temporary tool, at least until his long-term plans were fully realized. However, Victor failed to realize that Cain had never truly been misled. The alliance with Nick, if it had ever been established, was simply a front designed to make Victor feel secure, while Cain continued to quietly prepare deeper and more subtle moves to expand his influence. In truth, Cain had never given up on his plan to attack Newman Enterprises. With his sights set on taking down both Chancellor and Jabot, he knew that he had to be humble at the right time, then strike when his opponent was completely off guard. That was why Cain sought out Michael, not just as a legal advisor, but as a living weapon, a legal sword forged from the past of someone who had served Victor, who had participated in life-and-death battles in the deals between Newman and his competitors. Cain didn't need Michael for his ability to write lawsuits or handle contract disputes. He needed a tool that could shake the legal structure protecting Victor's empire, someone who understood Victor well enough to know where the weaknesses were, where the loopholes needed to be attacked. But Cain didn't stop there. He understood that Michael's hatred of Jack could also become a strategic advantage. If Michael still had unresolved grievances with Jabot, then pulling him into a dual attack plan aimed at both Newman and Jabot was an ideal double blow. Under the guise of Victor directing his attack on Jabot, Cain was secretly exploiting every internal conflict, every information pipeline, to open a secret path through Genoa's two largest corporations. At the same time, he maintained a facade of cooperation with Nick, holding fake meetings to show goodwill, stressing mutual commitments, and making safe business proposals to appease Victor. But inside, he was using Michael as a chip to probe every weakness in the system, every person who could be manipulated, every contract that Victor had personally drafted. Meanwhile, Michael began to see the terrifying similarities between Cain and Victor. Both were masters at using others to serve their own ends. But the difference was that Victor had limits, and Cain seemed to have none. Where Victor retained some sense of honor and principle in protecting his family and his name, Cain was willing to put anyone to death if it meant securing his business advantage. Michael grew increasingly uneasy, especially when the documents Cain asked him to review began to show signs of blatant illegality. Transactions structured through multiple shell companies, loan terms with unreasonable variable interest rates, and repressive stock buyback terms, all of which reminded Michael of the shady dealings he had once been involved in but no longer wanted to repeat. Amanda also began to realize that her withdrawal did not stop Kane, but made him more dangerous. The financial reports she had reviewed were redacted, expenses had suddenly increased without any clear source, and Michael had replaced her without any official announcement, making her realize that Kane was not simply making a personnel change but was wiping out any traces that might slow his advance. When Amanda ran into Michael at a legal event, the wary glances were quickly replaced with quiet suspicion. They both knew they were on the same chessboard, but neither was sure if they were the master or the pawn. If Amanda and Michael discover at the same time that they are both being manipulated, their cooperation could create a reaction that would completely destroy the world Kane is trying to build. They are the two people who understand the legal and financial structures Kane is using the most, each holding a secret that, when put together, will form a picture of fraud, deception, and manipulation on an unprecedented scale. Amanda, with her network of connections in the judiciary and the investigative agencies, can open official investigations. Michael, with his reputation and ability to manipulate the media, can turn everything into a scandal in a matter of hours. And when the two decide to cooperate, not out of personal gain but out of anger at being betrayed, that is the moment when Kane's entire power will be blown away. The only thing standing in the way of this cooperation is each person's pride. Amanda is still hurt, not just by being replaced but by having put her trust in someone who didn't deserve it. Michael is still uncertain whether Amanda is truly an ally or just someone playing a different game. But if the truth is proven that they were both tools in Kane's hands, their alliance will be based not just on convenience but on a vengeful union. Kane will then not only lose two of his most important pieces of the puzzle, but will also be faced with two of the smartest people who have ever stood by him, now holding all the evidence, all the stories, all the opportunities to expose him to the entire business community and the legal system of Genoa. And one day soon, when Victor receives an internal briefing from an anonymous source, revealing the full extent of the attack on Chancellor and Newman that Kane has been preparing in the shadows, he will understand that the threat he thought he had neutralized was never gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike the deadly blow. But this time, the blow would not come from outside, but from the very people Kane thought he had absolute control over.